Welcome to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK. Today I'm going to be talking to you all about how to create a tension swatch or a tension square, along with how to measure your tension and how important that is to your crochet projects. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and of course hit the notification bell so that you never miss out on another of my crochet tutorials again. So the materials that you're going to need to complete your tension swatch, if you're following along and aiming for the same tension as me, I'm using a bulky weight or a chunky weight yarn, which on the, this is going to be my normal paint box chunky, Simply Chunky that I'm going to be using. So the recommended hook size for this yarn is a 6mm crochet hook, but we're not going to be using a 6mm today. We're actually going to be using an 8mm crochet hook. You're also going to need a way to measure your tension square. So you can get these really nifty knitters rulers. Ignore the fact it says knitters. They work just as well for crocheters as well. And you need to make your swatch as big as your square. Or you can simply use a ruler. Any ruler will do, plastic, wood, whatever. The reason that we don't recommend, or I don't recommend, using a tape measure is that tape measures can stretch over time. So they're not going to give you an accurate reading. Although this might have some ink on it, I can still clearly use it. So why do we need to measure tension? Well, first and foremost, if you were to think about creating a garment such as a jumper, you want that to fit. So the designer will give you a gauge or a tension in her crochet pattern, their crochet pattern, so that you can check that your tension is going to be the same as theirs to ensure that your project comes out looking the same way and it is the same size. So to do that, we create a tension square so that we can measure the gauge. So the gauge is how many stitches and how many rows you have inside either 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And that is what we measure. So we measure how many stitches we have and how many rows we have within a square. And that gives us our gauge. First things we need to do is to make a tension swatch. Now I have, of course, in true Blue Peter style, already created mine, more to save time than anything. But if you want to follow along and create a corresponding tension swatch, very simply, I'm using an 8mm crochet hook. And the tension that we are looking for is 10.5 stitches, and let's check the rows. We'll count them in a moment. Over half treble crochet or half double crochet in the US. So that would tell you that you need to create a swatch in that stitch. So the pattern specifies the stitch that the gauge was worked in so that you can check that you're coming out at the same size. So if you're not following along with this one and you're just creating a swatch for a crochet pattern you're doing, check to see what stitch the designer created their gauge in. So I'm going to simply crochet, well, I'm going to start by doing a chain of 20 so that I can then work my tension square in half treble crochet. So do a chain of 20 and then create. This is how many rows have I done? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I can't tell. 2, 4, 6, 8. So do 10 rows of half treble crochet, half double crochet in the US, across, do 18 stitches, and that should give you a square big enough for us to measure. So do a chain of 20 and then work 10 rows of half double or half treble crochet with your 8mm crochet hook if you're following that along. So before we measure this one, and while you're making yours, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of why it's really important to check our gauge. So I also made the same swatch with a 5mm crochet hook. Is that a 5? Yes, it is a 5mm crochet hook. The exact same stitch, and I made it a similar size, but you can see quite dramatically the size differences in these stitches. So this is obviously a 5mm crochet hook with a chunky weight yarn. Is going to give you quite a thick, stiff fabric. So it's not very flexible. It doesn't have a lot of what they call drape. So you can see that this in the 8mm crochet hook is very not flimsy, but movable and drapey in comparison. Pop that over there for a moment because I'm going to show you one other that I did. And I made this swatch with a Whopper, a 10mm crochet hook, and goodness me, Look at the size difference. So this is a very loose and open fabric, and actually it almost becomes across as a bit lacy. So again, the drape is a lot more extreme than you get with the 8mm crochet hook, and this is a really good tip on an easy way of adjusting your tension. We're going to talk about that in a moment if we need to adjust our tension, how we do that really quickly and really easily. So let's measure this swatch first and foremost. So I'm going to show you initially using my knitter's square, but before I do that, I'm going to change my camera angle so that you can look down at exactly what I'm counting. So we're looking straight down onto our fabric here, and what we're going to look to do is to place our knitter's rule, I'm just going to flop this over because I think it's going to be easier, along the bottom or along a row. And we also need to make sure that we are catching one stitch as well. Now I've got well, it's an open fabric, I guess. Now I've grabbed a couple of pins, mainly because I want to know exactly where I'm measuring from and to kind of make my life a little bit easier. You don't have to pin this. However, if your project requires blocking and it's recommended that you block your project, you will need to do the same with your swatch. I'd always recommend that you measure your swatch on a flat surface. Measuring it on your leg is not going to give you an accurate number of stitches. We've all done it, but we shouldn't. So the first thing that I personally always measure are my stitches. I've got a pen and paper ready to jot down how many stitches I have and also how many rows I have. So I'm just pinning this so it doesn't move too much. Ideally, you should pin this maybe to an ironing board and so it doesn't move at all. So to count the stitches across, I'm going to count the posts, which is the bit in between. So 1, 2, I'm going to move that along because I want to be right where that stitch starts for when I start counting. So we're not stretching this fabric or pulling it or moving it. We're simply just pressing down so that it doesn't do that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and a half. Whew, bang on. That's exactly what I was expecting for my 8-inch swatch. 8mm crochet hook swatch. So then we count, that was across 4 inches and that's the same as 10 centimeters. So now I'm going to count my rows. Now I can see that I've got a row just here and I'm going to count up my rows. And I know that a lot of people find counting rows, especially with single crochet, quite difficult. So I'm going to take my time and do it very carefully. So we've got this row here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 rows. So in my swatch that I made with my 8mm crochet hook, I have 10.5 stitches across 8 rows, and that is over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So that should be roughly, pretty much perfectly what you have if you were to make a pattern that I've made using an 8mm crochet hook. That would be the gauge you need to achieve to get the same size on the project that I made that you're now making from my pattern. You can imagine if I swap out this swatch for a bigger swatch, let's grab that. So this is the 10mm one. You can imagine that if I was to make my project or I didn't achieve the right amount of rows and I wanted to make it a little bit looser, the easiest thing I could do would be to change and make my tension swatch with a bigger hook, because that would give, so if I had too many stitches in here or too many rows, I would remake my tension swatch using a bigger crochet hook, because that way I'd have less stitches in this 4-inch or 10 centimeter square. So the same will go if you have too few stitches inside your tension swatch. You would try making it with a smaller crochet hook to give you more stitches within that square. So if you find that you've created your tension swatch and you simply need to make it slightly bigger or slightly smaller to match the gauge of the designer, try a different crochet hook. That is the easiest way to change your tension. There are lots of different hints and tips you'll find over on my crochet blog as well. I'll link it below for you of some other quick and easy ways on how to adjust your tension ever so slightly. So I hope that you found this quite useful and that you're never going to skip this step of making a tension swatch again, so that you can make sure that your products and your lovely makes finish perfectly. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And of course, hit the notification bell so that you never miss out on another one of my crochet tutorials again.